Hello and welcome to episode 15 of Beyond the Box Score. Trayvon Hastings, Joey Korzanowski, late night. Here we're going to record both of our episodes for the rest of this week now, but we're going to start off with this first episode being episode 15, and boy, do we have a lot to talk about. There was several coaching hires and or firings or retirements in the last week and a half prior to our last episodes, which you've seen posted this week from Thanksgiving. But we also have a lot of college basketball to talk about, some new news in the last 24 to 48 hours, and even sooner than that regarding Deshaun Watson, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and various other things. So we're going to skip the college football playoff rankings and all that stuff for episode 16, but specifically for this episode, we're going to start with the coaching carousel, and it happened. Lane Kiffin did decide to leave Ole Miss, take the money, take the bag, and go to LSU, and in what is, in my opinion, definitely a top 5 job in all of college football, and arguably a top 25 football coaching position, because I think there are 5 programs in college football you could argue are better jobs than about 10 NFL jobs on a yearly basis, those being Ohio State, Georgia, Texas, Alabama, and LSU. And if you're at those schools specifically, you're not going to leave that school, even for a lower tier NFL job. You could even argue Notre Dame. I don't know how much I would probably agree with that one, or USC. Like, that's probably the next tier. But Lane Kiffin leaves. He goes to LSU. Alex Golesh officially hired in as the head coach at Auburn from USF. And then Tulane's John Summerall takes the job at Florida. And I actually got the opportunity to listen to all of their opening pressers, and there was a lot of similarities of what they all were preaching, what the 80s that hired them were preaching as well, in regards to what they were looking for their various programs. But I thought across the board, we got a lot of good coaching hires. Chris Kleiman, in the last 48 hours, has decided to retire, and officially today, he's stepping down from Kansas State, and it appears Texas A&M offensive coordinator, which I believe is Colin Klein, will be taking that head coaching position as well. So there's been a lot of moving parts in college football, and I want to get your thoughts on the various hirings.
Yeah, it's really picked up as of late. Obviously the Lane Kiffin one has really kind of taken over the college football world by storm. And at first, I don't blame him for taking this job whatsoever. I think everybody would agree it is definitely a step up over Ole Miss. But what I did question is, how much of a step up is it from Ole Miss? Because what is the goal? What is the goal at LSU, right? To win a national championship, to compete for the playoffs every single year, be a top ranked team. Well, that's what he was at Ole Miss, right? I mean, you're ranked in the top 5. You were pretty much a shoe-in for the playoffs this year. You had a really good chance, in my opinion, to win a national championship. I mean, were you going to? I probably wouldn't pick Ole Miss over, even Georgia, Indiana, Ohio State just yet. But the point is, you were there and you had a chance. So it's interesting. Yeah, you take the slight pay raise. Yeah, you go to a place where you might have more resources, but I think Ole Miss has more resources than people think. So, while I think he made the right move for himself, I just find it interesting. I feel like he's kind of going backwards and he's kind of resetting his clock, because it took him a little bit to build what he did at Ole Miss, and it's just like you were there, right? Like you almost reached the top, and now you're going over to LSU and you're just kind of restarting. But I mean, with the way that college football is now, there's absolutely no doubt that he can have LSU in the top 3 within the next 2 years.
I definitely can agree on some of those parts and some of those various points that you made. For my perspective, it's everybody's painting Lane Kiffin as the villain, and yes, he's had a lot of low points in his entire coaching career, and this was kind of the reinvigoration of that, and being the heel, being the villain of college football. But I just think this all played out the way that it did because of the college football calendar and how it's structured, how it's set up. We have coaches leaving, going to new jobs, some of them allowed to coach the remainder of their season, like with what is the case with John Summerall and potentially with Alex Golesh. But for Lane Kiffin, both sides cannot agree to that. He's going to just focus on LSU, and it's solely due to the calendar. And the signing day was today, actually, on this Wednesday that we're recording. So new coaches have to, you would like to know as a recruit who's going to be your head coach, what's the offensive or defensive philosophy going to be, etc. So that's a tweak that needs to be made. I saw a point that somebody made on social media about we need to have a realization that the players need to stop being held to the academic calendar. And that's where I disagree because at the end of the day, they are still student athletes and that should be how it's prioritized. But overall, it felt like as more time went by, Lane Kiffin was going to take this job. I know the decision was pretty much pushed back to the buzzer, but if he would have just returned at Ole Miss, there would have been an announcement about it early. He would have made it very well known before ever needing some sort of decision. And he kind of pulled a LeBron here and just pushed it back as far as he could. He got, some of that center of attention stuff that people claims he really likes and wants to have. So he gets a huge bag. He gets to be at what he would deem as a dream school, like a dream opportunity, and to coach what according to him, Nick Saban probably told him was the best job in America. Pete Carroll telling him as well, your dad would want you to take this position. So obviously there were a lot of different factors for Lane Kiffin's decision, his mentors telling him, what their thoughts were, and that ultimately led to him taking this LSU job. But obviously we know what's there. We know it's a talent rich and historically rich, program. So I now transition it from knowing what Lane Kiffin will be able to do. Like, it's one of those jobs you just can't mess up. Like, you have so many resources and so many things available. If you somehow don't do what you're supposed to, like, we're going to look at you differently. The example would be Ryan Day being at Ohio State, and they have 9-3 seasons or 8-4 seasons. Like, Ohio State has lost more than 2 games only once in like the last 20 years. So we know what that program is. They're the model of consistency. And if we date that back to 2000, they've actually only lost 3 or more games on 2 different occasions. And one of those was Tattoo Gate. So I think LSU is, obviously they had a down year. They've had a few down years, but they've got a offensive guru who's going to be able to spark that side of the ball that has struggled and go from there. So I like that hire. I really like the Summerall hire in Florida as well. He's a proven winner. Florida has not done a lot of winning, and I think a lot of the philosophies that he has in mind, he'll be able to translate. He did talk about in his presser, he's kind of been forced to play a style of football at Tulane this year that he wasn't wanting to, but you have to make the system fit to the players that you have. And I think he made the point very clear in his press conference that he wants to light up that scoreboard at Florida, so maybe expect a little bit more of an explosive offense, some more spread from the Florida Gators next year. And the same can be said for Alex Golesh at Auburn. He wants to have a very explosive offense. He wants to use the entire field horizontally, vertically, a lot of wide sets, wide bunch sets as well, where you're literally at the edge of that sideline and you have to defend all of that space and create one-on-one opportunities. But Golesh put a huge emphasis on running the football. Like, that's where his offense starts, is through the run, and that's what opens up the pass. But aggressiveness is what he preached. Aggressiveness offensively, aggressiveness defensively, and aggressiveness on special teams and playing complementary football. So I think for all of those schools, ironically, those are kind of what they need right now. On the A&M thing with Kansas State and Colin Klein, is still in the early stages, but Kansas State legend, one of the best college football quarterbacks that we've had at all in recent memory, especially in the last 15 to 20 years. And he's going to go back to the school he graduated from and was nearly, in my opinion, a Heisman contender and could have been Heisman winner there. And he's going to try and revive Avery Johnson's career for whatever it's become. I think he's a good hire just from his relationship with the university. So I think all these coaches and all these hires, these schools, I think they all just did a phenomenal job.
Yeah, there really aren't many hires that I feel like have been bad. I mean, I feel like the really only school that's kind of messing it up is Penn State, right? It feels like they've completely either whiffed on all of the guys that they wanted, or they just didn't either pitch their ideas enough, or they just weren't active enough. I mean, the whole point of firing James Franklin in the middle of the season was to get a jump start on all of that, and here they are. Sign day has passed, and they still haven't signed anybody. So I think that's a little tough. But the one thing that I would ask you is, if you were Ole Miss, would you have let Lane Kiffin continue to coach or not? Because Brian Hartline, I believe, is still calling plays for Ohio State. He's still going to be, I don't know how much he'll be calling plays, but He's still going to be the offensive coordinator. I think Ryan Day announced today. So even though that Brian Hartline's got a lot going on, and even though he is leaving, uh, he's still going to be with the team. But that was kind of the big thing here with Ole Miss, right? It was their best best season in school history, or best season at least in 60 years or so. And now they have to do it without a head coach. And it seems like Lane Kiffin wanted to come back and coach. At least that's what the reporting was. But Ole Miss said no. So I wanted to get your take on that.
And the athletic director at Ole Miss actually countered and said he doesn't believe everything Lane Kiffin has made public is 100% accurate. So we don't know who said what, whose plans were what.
Yeah.
What I know is if I was in that position, like, I'm not going to let that coach, who, by the way, just went to a bitter rival, I'm not going to let him continue to coach at the school, only for the fact that he now has, however much time to potentially poach your players, your coaching staff, all of that. Like, the entire offensive coaching staff from Ole Miss is pretty much gone. And people may not know who Pete Golding is. He's been at Ole Miss for 3 years. He's on the defensive side of the ball. People might be wondering why he wasn't announced as an interim, but instead the long-term replacement, like the permanent fill-in head coach. And the reasoning is very simple. It is the calendar. You can't have an interim head coach have signing day on Wednesday and then try to do a coaching hire and hire somebody in January. It doesn't make sense. So they kind of had to go that route. As for Penn State, they've botched it. I think they had an expectation of what their brand was and the jobs or the names it might attract, but that has not happened. Obviously, if somehow miraculously Kalen DeBoer gets fired, then maybe Penn State's the place for him. I've heard a lot of Kalani Sitake from BYU. However, I saw reporting that he's going to likely tell schools here in the next 24 to 48 hours he's going to stay at BYU. So I think that was kind of the shoe-in guy for Penn State outside of Matt Rule, because Matt Rule has a good relationship with the athletic director at Penn State, and Matt Rule signed an extension. So Penn State has really nowhere to go except probably doing what Ole Miss just did and, announcing the interims and that staff as the permanent moving forward head coaches. You don't really have a choice there, and there hasn't been any firings recently that would change that trajectory. So Penn State has some work to do. Ole Miss,
They could get Billy Napier. I'll throw him out there
they,
for
they,
Penn
they
State.
could they could technically go get Billy Napier. Not sure how much of a fan I would be of that. And obviously someone is going to watch this and hear this and say Brian Kelly. First off, Brian Kelly is not a good coach. He's not what Penn
Yeah,
State
no.
needs either. And according to his lawyers, LSU made it virtually impossible for a team to rehire Brian Kelly. So we're not going to probably see him again. I think that's a benefit for a lot of the programs that he would be coaching at. But overall, that was kind of all of the coaching carousel stuff that we had. There's been so much of it going on. Will Stein, the Oregon offensive coordinator, he went to Kentucky. Brian Hartline, today, it was just announced, he is going to South Florida at USF to replace Alex Golesh. And we already saw a decommitted receiver from Ohio State go to USC. The big gem, 5-star receiver Chris Henry stayed with the Buckeyes. But this is really the true recruiting test for Ohio State now. Is it Brian Hartline who's been, the reason all these receivers have been coming, or is it because of the Ohio State brand, Ryan Day, and the program he has established, despite Brian Hartline leaving? So this is kind of that true test for Ohio State now on the recruiting side of things. But I like the hire by USF. It gives you an edge at receiver for recruiting, especially. And I'm sure Brian Hartline wants to run a open spread style offense. We'll see who he puts on his staff. As for Kentucky, Will Stein's a good hire. You get some offensive juice in there as well with him being from Oregon, going to a Kentucky team that has not had offense since pretty much my existence and your existence. But overall, I thought it was a lot of good hires that were made, especially those lower tier jobs like the Kentuckys and the USFs.
How about Michigan State, Pat Fitzgerald? I thought that was an interesting hire. I feel like it could be a good hire, but I think it's risky because you haven't seen if Pat Fitzgerald can succeed in an era with transfer portal and NIL. Because we haven't seen him coach for a while. I forget what year it was, but it was back when Northwestern was in the Big Ten championship. The Big Ten West. Remember they were playing Ohio State. I think when they had Dwayne Haskins. So I think it was around 2019, 2020 or so. So it's definitely been a while, but he had those Northwestern teams going. I mean, I think we could all agree Northwestern has not been the same since he has left. So I think it's a risky hire for Michigan State, but I think it has potential to be a good one.
It's a cheap alternative, someone that understands the Big Ten, and
Mhm.
someone who, despite his struggles the last 3 years at Northwestern, I think in Big Ten games, his last 3 or 4 years, they went like 3-29. I think they won 7 games overall. But there were other years where they brought back a lot of returning pieces. They excelled, they developed, and they went to Big Ten title games, or they won 8, 9, 10 games. So very up and down for Pat Fitzgerald in terms of the overall record and the consistency at Northwestern. But I do think, especially with him being cleared of all of those allegations and lawsuits made when he got fired, and then winning that big chunk of cash from Northwestern, I think with his name cleared and being out of the game for some time, bringing him on is something Michigan State will feel relatively confident about. I don't think Jonathan Smith deserved to be fired because Michigan State has kind of shot themselves in the foot as a program for quite some time now. They haven't been the same since they fired Mark D'Antonio. So, a similar case for them. But I thought really there was no bad hire, to be honest. I didn't really see a bad hire throughout this entire cycle.
Yeah, I was honestly kind of impressed. I feel like a lot of schools got kind of the fit that they really wanted, and honestly, I think Brian Hartline's kind of a good fit for USF. And we talked about it a little bit, and you mentioned the recruiting aspect of it, but I think this is a lot better of a fit than say like a Penn State or a Kentucky. I didn't really buy into the fact that some of the reporting was that he was interested in some of those big schools. I feel like that'd be too big of a jump. I did see somebody mention if he ever wants to kind of take over after Ryan Day. If he ever wants to coach at Ohio State, you need some head coaching experience beforehand. So this would be a good place for him to do that if he wanted to return in the future. But and Ryan Day is also only 46. I have a feeling he's not going anywhere anytime soon, especially if Ohio State continues at the level that they're at, because Ohio State doesn't seem to have any down years. But I'll be interested to see what he can do. He's moved up the ladder, pretty quick. He was only the wide receiver coach in 2018, so I mean, just really a couple of years when you look back at it. Although it feels like he's been there for longer because of how much he's accomplished. I mean, but I have a hard time imagining that USF isn't going to get some of these big time receivers. I mean, just because I feel like it's constantly going to work out for both sides, right? Because if you're Ohio State, you can still hang your hat on, maybe it wasn't necessarily Brian Hartline, but it's the culture that you've created. It's the good quarterback play you continue to bring in. You bring in a group of good guys, and everybody develops off of each other. Then if you're Brian Hartline going to USF, you could say, hey, look at all these guys that I put through the NFL. Uh, you know, you can come do that here in one of the best group of fives.
I agree. I think the Heartline move is a relatively underrated one. It's obviously risky with no head coaching experience, but going to a G5 school, he has a chance to solidify himself and the program. And if he's able to do that, then the bigger schools will come calling here in the next probably 2-3 years. So I do think it makes sense for Brian Hartline to go. I thought it'd be next year, not this year for sure. But that's not the case. So we'll see who Ohio State puts in place to fill not only the OC responsibilities from Brian Hartline, but a lot of the receiver coach responsibilities as well. He was still very heavily involved with those receivers. So I'll be fascinated to see who steps up and takes that job. But that wasn't all that we had. We had a lot of coaching stuff, but there was a big week in college basketball last week and now into this week for the Big Ten, specifically, primarily Michigan. Their dominant week in college basketball. And you could definitely argue they are truly the number one team in all of college hoops right now. I still will give the edge to Purdue for various reasons, but Michigan, what a start they've had to the year. Michigan State, they got a big win against North Carolina. They dominated an undefeated Iowa team yesterday as well, and they're off to an undefeated start. And then Purdue, obviously, we just talked about them. Illinois just lost to UConn last week, but they'll be there at the end. So I think it's been a great start for the Big Ten in college basketball.
Yeah, I mean, if they keep this up, I mean, there's a real chance that the Big Ten could have 3 1 seeds when you really think about it. If they keep it up at this rate, I was watching some of the pregame before this Louisville Arkansas game, and Seth Greenberg was on there and said that a lot of these out of conference wins help your conference as a whole because that all that does is generate more quad one wins for you. Come conference play in January, in February. So the fact that the Big Ten is really dominating, kind of these this early on right now, it's only going to help them down the line come March. So I've loved what I've seen out of the Big Ten so far. I mean, obviously the SEC is up there too, but yeah, Michigan State, Michigan, and Purdue. I think you could all make a case right now that um, they are national title contenders, and I think you could make a case for all of them on why they could win it. And honestly, they've all kind of done it. Um, in a little bit of different ways. Purdue really just brought everybody back. Michigan has really dominated the transfer portal, and then Michigan State. It's just while they brought a lot of guys back, it's just a continuous culture year in and year out that Tom Izzo has done, and it works every single year. So I've been awfully impressed by all three teams, and it wouldn't shock me if if the Big Ten does end up getting 3 number 1 seeds. If they stay like this.
I think you hit the nail on the coffin there. Not much for me to add other than we'll see which team survives the Big Ten gauntlet the best come January, come February, and late into March or early into March. Typically, that tends to be Purdue and Illinois. Michigan drops a few. Michigan State drops a few. However, with the way it's trending right now, I definitely think it's going to be a fight to the very end for not only the regular season championship in the Big Ten, but the seeding complications for when they get into the Big Ten tournament and the seeding. I agree with you. There could definitely be 3 1 seeds. I don't think it will happen. I think there'll be three amongst those three that we're referring to in Michigan, Michigan State, and Purdue. Probably three of them being at least a 2 or 3 seed, and then Purdue probably being a 1 seed. If I had to guess, I think that's what is likely to happen. But Illinois will have a chance there at the end as well to get a top 4 seed, and we'll see who else in the conference emerges after that. I think Iowa's going to have a good year. I think Wisconsin's going to have a good year. Hopefully, Ohio State and Indiana do. They're off to good starts right now, but they always get off to good starts, and it's Big Ten play that destroys them. So the Big Ten is very deep in basketball, and I think that's going to continue. And despite Tom Izzo not embracing the portal, he does it enough to rebuild his team and still preach Michigan State and his old style philosophy, which, like you've said, Dabo does at Clemson, but doesn't work as well. He's not the type of, I think, motivator or coach that Tom Izzo is, and that always gets proven in March Madness when Michigan State's going on deep runs. So I think overall it was a great week for the Big Ten. Purdue had the big win against Texas Tech by 30 plus points. Michigan won all three of their games last week by 30 or more. So what a week for the Big Ten, especially those top schools and how dominant they were. And it was a great week for them. Not a great last 24 hours for the Bucks. An announcement came out that Giannis Antetokounmpo and the Milwaukee Bucks are going to potentially open up the conversation about where is the best fit for Giannis's future, where should he go. Decision will likely be official or finalized within the next 2 weeks with Giannis and what happens. That's not the only weird kind of timing that happened in terms of the NBA. Chris Paul randomly at like 3 a.m. last night got waived by the Clippers, despite them saying in their statement he's one of the all-time Clippers players and all-time players ever, and we're going to help him through this next phase of his career and finding a fit for him. Very weird timing for both of those, but I want to get your thoughts on them because, first off, the Chris Paul thing, outright just not warranted, deserved, very disrespectful, I think, to Chris Paul and what he even did to get the Clippers where they did back, about 10 years ago. As for the Giannis thing, he should have been traded in the summer. I think we can agree on that. I think we can also agree it is best for them to part ways with everything that has happened. Moving on from Dame, not really having pieces outside of Miles Turner. Giannis has missed a few games already this year. He, has to carry such a load that his body is going to wear down at some point here sooner rather than later. And he's just talked about potentially being the all-time leading scorer in 4 to 5 years, potentially 6 to 7 or 8 years. So I think in order for him to do that, and I do think it's possible, he's got to stay healthy, and that might mean removing himself from the Bucks, going to a better situation for himself physically, so he can get through another 7 or 8 years in the NBA.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is probably going to be one of the biggest trades, yeah, ever. To be honest, I mean, in terms of just the haul that someone's going to get or someone's going to give up for Giannis, I think is going to be crazy. But before we get into that, the whole Chris Paul thing, it was definitely weird. But I will say though, it's hard to kind of judge, who is at fault here. Obviously, on the surface, the Clippers doing this, yeah, obviously, I mean, it looks like a really bad move. It just looks like you said, completely disrespectful. But the reporting was that Chris Paul and Tyronn Lue were not on speaking terms for quite some time. So I don't really know what led to that. I don't know if Chris Paul did something or if Ty Lue did something. So I can't really make too much of a judgment on that until we get more details. But yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see where Chris Paul goes because honestly, I mean, Chris Paul can still be a solid point guard off the bench. I mean, he can still provide some value to a potential contender. But yeah, obviously the real storyline is Giannis, and I definitely want to get your opinion on who you think would be a good fit because I feel like I mean Giannis is one of those players. Yeah, he's a little more ball dominant, but I mean you really put him on any team with some shooters around him. I mean you're instantly going to be a finals contender.
Before I answer that, to answer the whole Chris Paul thing, so in the ESPN article that I went through and decided to read, which I don't read a ton of their articles, but this one I was curious on what might be in there. It sounded like Chris Paul, being one of the few locker room leaders, was someone who was very demonstrative in his leadership, very vocal in his leadership, and he definitely made his feelings known in terms of accountability and the very poor start to the year the Clippers have had. I mean, they're 5-16, and they have too much talent on their team to be 5-16, despite all the injuries. They need to be playing better, especially when they don't even own their next couple of first round picks. The Oklahoma City Thunder own their pick this year and next year in a swap. So that's just great news for the rest of the NBA that the Thunder are going to be able to have 2 more lottery picks in the next 2 years from a team we didn't expect to be in the lottery. So that's a whole another thing for a different day. But for Chris Paul, I mean, I agree with you. I think he's still a serviceable point guard, probably not a starter, but one of the best facilitators and playmakers and just pure point guards we've ever seen in the history of the game. And that skill doesn't really go away. We saw Rajon Rondo on a Lakers team in the bubble do what he did his entire career for them, despite being the age that he was, because that skill set doesn't ever necessarily vanish. A lot of the physical athletic traits do, but the NBA or basketball brain and the IQ and the intellect that goes into some of that stuff never goes away. So Chris Paul could definitely be a benefit somewhere. I think another thing I had heard lingering was that the Clippers were likely going to probably try to trade Chris Paul or move on from Chris Paul, throw him in some sort of trade that they make soon, and he didn't want to get moved somewhere he didn't want to be. So maybe he requested his release. I don't think that's what happened because Chris Paul put on his Instagram at like 3 a.m., just found out I'm heading home. So that whole situation's weird. I don't really know what's going on with all of that. I think if Chris Paul's holding his teammates accountable for being 5-16 or things that he's seen work, do it. Chris Paul, for those who don't know, everywhere he's gone in his career, the team's winning percentage has skyrocketed each season. I mean, he took a Thunder team we thought would be in the lottery to a pretty solid playoff run as the lead guard pretty late into his career. So Chris Paul's a born winner. He has always won wherever he's been. Even in San Antonio, the 1 year he was there, I thought they might re-sign him. Then they got De'Aaron Fox. They didn't really need Chris Paul. But he even improved their winning and I think their trajectory, even being there for the 1 year and building the relationship with Victor Wembanyama and helping him as he will eventually ascend to probably being the best player in the entire league. But for the Giannis thing, as I transition into that, the Spurs make sense. Obviously, the Knicks make sense. The Knicks were rumored as the only team in the summer to even have interest in trading for Giannis. They were the team with the best capability as well, because in all likelihood, you just move either one of Mikal Bridges or Karl-Anthony Towns. Salaries match pretty well, and you're good to go. So they may not get as good of a player haul from the Knicks. They have enough draft picks, I think, to make it work. Although the Nets have most of their draft picks because they traded 7 of them for Michael Bridges, which I don't necessarily agree with. I don't think Michael Bridges is that good of a player to warrant that. But I think him going for 7, Gobert going for 4 or 5 first rounders, all of those examples previously would make the Bucks think they're gonna get 5 to 10 first rounders for Giannis. It's not gonna happen. They'll get 3 or 4 because Giannis will likely dictate where he wants to go. He'll pull that leverage card, and he's got a few years of his contract still left, so that would be good for the Bucks because they can get a better haul. Whereas you would be trading somebody on an expiring, you're not going to get as much back because there's a lot more risk involved for that team trading for that player. So I do think Giannis will probably make the destination known. I would not rule out the Heat either because they have enough pieces to make the trade work. I think they've got a comparable package. They could throw a Tyler Hero in there if they wanted. If they want to keep him, you could throw Khalil Ware in there. You could throw Andrew Wiggins in there. They just got Norman Powell. Like it really depends on what the Bucks want to do with the roster. If it's a true rebuild, you're gonna trade him for a ton of picks, some expiring contracts, and hopefully some promising prospects. But if they want to contend or try to compete, then, well, you're kind of floating into that whole like Atlanta Hawks mediocrity that we talk about a lot of the time and constantly being a play-in team. And yet that's what you have to be wary of in the NBA is being really stuck in the middle. There's a lot of teams stuck in the middle. So I would be stuck if I tried to think of other teams. Obviously, the Warriors are going to be talked about. They're going to be a fascinating destination.
That's what I was going to mention. Just because I
And
think they have like the young pieces to move. Kuminga, Moses Moody, probably Pajemski, maybe Jimmy Butler. Although I don't think the Bucks would want to take on that contract, but he might need to be put in there. It'd probably take a third team to be honest to get that one done. But yeah, I mean, with Steph Curry and Draymond, the Warriors are only getting older, so they wouldn't necessarily reset their age clock, but I mean, it would certainly help them get younger.
it would extend their championship window having a top 3 player in the NBA. No offense to Steph, but he is not that at this current point. More like a top 10 player for sure, I would
Yeah,
argue. And I would lean on trading Draymond instead of Jimmy Butler just for various reasons. I just think Giannis would not fit with Draymond. They're 2 non-shooters, and frankly, a lot of the time they both will have the ball on some level. If Giannis goes there, I think he could kind of fill the role Draymond's had as a secondary playmaker and facilitator because Giannis does average 6 or 7 assists. He has done that for multiple years in a row now. Like he's an underrated playmaker, and when he gets downhill, it's scary. I think Golden State, from a stylistic standpoint, it's hard because Jimmy Butler's a slasher, Draymond Green's a non-shooter. You have Steph. Even Kuminga he's better at the 3 than the other 2, and he's developed it over time. But naturally, that guy is a slasher as well. He wants to get downhill and finish at the rim. Kuminga would likely go to the Bucks in this trade anyway, so it wouldn't matter. However, if you're the Warriors, you have to seriously think about how much are we gutting our team for one player, because a lot of the players you just mentioned are key contributors and role players to this Warriors team, and a lot of times for Moody and Podziemski, they're starters. So for the Warriors, it's a simple: is it worth it? Another team that came to my mind was the Pistons, because of the youth on the team. They don't really have a tradable contract for that. It would have to be probably Tobias Harris, Duncan Robinson, and Isaiah Stewart with a ton of picks. However, if Milwaukee just wants the draft assets and they want to work through the draft, that could be a place, I think, that makes sense. The Pistons have the great start to the year, 17-4 now, and if they truly want to put a stamp on the Eastern Conference and, making the claim that they are here to stay, go get Giannis. The Celtics probably won't do it. It would be interesting because you have those 2 massive contracts coming in, and Giannis is better than both of those players. If you would even consider doing it, just doing it to maybe surprise some people. I wouldn't be like crazy shocked, but don't see it happening. I would rule out the Sixers for a lot of the same reasons. You would have to trade a injury riddled Embiid who doesn't fit on the Bucks, and or Paul George, who the Bucks probably don't want. And I don't think Philly's draft assets are comparable to a lot of these other teams and what they have to offer. So, I mean, there's probably a few other teams out there to mention, but in all likelihood, the ones that we highlighted at the beginning, the Spurs, the Heat, maybe the Warriors, and definitely the Knicks, probably the market for Giannis. And he's probably going to have the right, because of everything he's done for Milwaukee, he's probably going to have the right to make that decision himself.
Yeah, in which obviously is going to be a contender. So I mean that automatically I feel like that kind of takes away some of the leverage that the Bucks would have. You kind of pigeonhole yourselves into some of these teams that might not have the same type of draft assets as a not contending team would. Obviously, their picks would be better. They might have more of them, but yeah, I mean, I think honestly, I think this is the best thing for Giannis. He's only getting older. This has been rumored for a couple of years now, to be honest, that he's either been unhappy. The whole Damian Lillard thing just didn't necessarily work out. They just weren't good enough defensively, and then the injury, recently, obviously, that is just a complete bummer. There's nothing you can do about that. But it was never the best fit, to be honest. Well, I liked Dame, I really have his whole career. At this stage in his career, it just wasn't the best fit. And then the Bucks never really did anything after that. I mean, they went and got Miles Turner, and I liked that, but it felt like it was just kind of a younger, better Brook Lopez on a little more athletic Brook Lopez. So Bucks haven't really done anything to kind of come back from that. So I think trading, Giannis, obviously that would, be a complete heartbreaker, I'm sure for the fans, but what choice do you really have? You really kind of have to just hit reset. You kind of have to, I don't want to say blow it up, but you really just kind of need to hit reset, stockpile on as many assets as you can, and really just kind of start over.
I agree. I think that is the best route for Milwaukee to go. I think Giannis's time in Milwaukee is kind of flamed out. We felt like when they won that championship and they had Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton both healthy and honestly on the back ends of their primes, that they could potentially get another one or maybe two championships. Unfortunately, Chris Middleton's had too many health problems. Drew Holiday's play, despite still being one of the best defenders in the league, offensively his play has slowly declined a little bit. He still has nights where he's very, very good and very elite, but he's obviously a defensive first guard, and he's very good at it. But I think when the Bucks pivoted off of Drew Holiday and they went and they got Dame, it completely threw off what their team makeup was, which was having a very sound perimeter defensive team with Giannis back there, with Brook Lopez back there, and they could cover a lot of their weaknesses. And they definitely could strategically give away certain things to a team and they would be fine. When they went to Dame, honestly, their perimeter defense just completely took a hit. And defensively, they became one of the worst teams in the league. They still were giving up the same issues. Like, they were one of the, when they had Drew Holiday and Brook Lopez and Chris Middleton and all these players, they gave up a ton of corner threes, but they were okay with giving up corner threes. It was everything else they were worried about, and they usually did a pretty good job at it. As they transitioned the roster, the defense just never recovered. Giannis has ran into more injury issues as time's gone on, and he probably will continue to. But I think part of that is the offensive usage that he's had to take on a nightly basis. And I mean, the other night against the Wizards, he had 29 points in 19 minutes. He didn't have to play because in much of the game because the Wizards are terrible, but it still doesn't change the fact that Giannis shouldn't have to do that. So I'll be fascinated to see what happens there. I will also be fascinated to see what happens for the Cleveland Browns as Deshaun Watson's IR window, the 21 days, has officially been activated. And I know you want to hear my thoughts, but I want to hear your thoughts first, officially here on this podcast about this whole situation and what you think should happen, because I think I'm going to have a different answer from you.
Yeah, so I think it's the right move, to activate him. So obviously we know the financial, stake that the Browns have in Deshaun Watson. We know what they gave up to go and get him. They obviously have a lot tied into him. So naturally, it would make sense to try and get as much out of this as you can. Although I question, how much is there really to still try and get out. But I think it makes sense to activate him. It doesn't mean he has to play this year, and I don't think he's going to play this year. I think him playing next year is more in question. I think that's more of a possibility if you want to have that conversation. But this year, I think they want to give Shitter Sanders the rest of the year so that they can make a good judgment based on the sample size that they have on him and about their quarterback position going forward. However, I do think there is a good chance that he at least, I don't want to say plays next year, but he's going to be at least be in competition to potentially play. Whether the Browns feel like they need to draft a quarterback in the first round, whether they want to stick with Dylan Gabriel or Shitter Sanders, again, that is totally up to them. And honestly, we really need to see Shitter Sanders play more than 2 games, right? He's played 2.5 games. He's made 2 starts. Thought he's looked okay in both, but I think the main thing is over the next 5. You want to see if they can, or if he can build on that. If he can show you more flashes each week, he can show signs of development, of improvement. I think that's really going to be the big key. But here, uh, yeah, I don't mind Deshaun coming back to practice. I mean, you might as well, right? If you want him to be in competition next year. I mean, if you're the Browns, you are the most desperate team I've seen in a long time for a quarterback. You have to weigh all your options. And if that includes a potentially healthy Deshaun Watson, which we haven't seen in some time, because I had said, I question how much you can still get out of him. 2 years ago, the shoulder injury, season ending. I don't think he was fully healthy coming into this past year with the shoulder injury. I think he was second guessing himself. I think you saw it in his play. He wasn't taking the shots down the field, or he wasn't ripping the ball the way that we were used to seeing before. And then last year, the Achilles. It's just one thing on top of another. I question his confidence in himself. His mental state. I mean, his confidence has to be shot. If we're being completely honest, and I wouldn't blame him. I mean, you have not consistently been on the field in 4 years, 4 or 5 years now. So it's a terrible situation. The Browns, huge swing and miss, obviously. Jimmy Haslam, the owner, came out and said that in the offseason. So I don't know if they really think that they can still get more out of this. But if there's a chance they can, they have to take it.
I agree with activating the window. I also probably agree with him not playing this year. The Browns are very unlikely to play themselves into some sort of playoff spot, although their odds are not fully and officially eliminated. I just want to throw that out there because we've
Not
seen crazy.
mathematically out of it.
It won't happen, to be blunt, but I personally think because the Browns are going to be completely inept of trying to move off of his contract, and cutting him doesn't enable you to do that either because you guaranteed all of his money, unless there's some sort of sneaky Zion Williams like injury incentives in there. Deshaun Watson, I fear, and by I fear, I mean I fear for these Browns fans, including yourself, that he will play a considerable amount next year because the Browns will feel like they didn't get enough from Dylan Gabriel or Shador, and it can't be any worse by playing Deshaun Watson. And it also truly just comes down to where they think this roster's at. Do they think they can actually get into the playoffs with this roster, contend with this roster? Maybe you're going to go to the savvy, I'll say savvy with finger quotes when I say that, veteran in Deshaun Watson because you think he has a better chance of getting you that far than the other 2 younger quarterbacks. But overall, I would agree. I don't think he was ever fully healthy. I don't think he's a good fit for the Stefanski offense either, to be honest with you. But in that game that he did mess up his Achilles, you had pointed out in the past when we've talked about how he looked much better in that game specifically. It wasn't a ton of yards, but it was a lot of efficient football. He was completing passes. He was, quick as well with his decision making. And then he goes down with the injury. So I think it'll be interesting to see what type of Deshaun Watson we get. Is he going to be mobile? Is he going to be athletic like he used to be in Houston? Probably not. And he wasn't even prior to that Achilles anyway in Cleveland. I think there was some lingering issues as well that we all know. And then also that shoulder injury that probably played a role in his play. And I think now, as long as his shoulder is fully healthy and he's a capable enough pocket passer, which I think I can say from his previous stints with various teams, whether that was Clemson or Houston or whatever, he can sit in the pocket and throw. It's obviously not his ideal game, but he may be forced to do that now. So I would be curious to see how he looks. And to be honest, we won't see him probably until next preseason, and that'll be our first look. Is he with the ones? Is he with the twos? Where is he? And if he looks really good in the preseason, maybe we have a conversation then. But it's really hard to get a read on this whole situation and make a good judgment call on it when we just, like you said, really haven't seen Deshaun Watson in his fullest, healthiest form since Houston, and that's been now 4 or 5 years plus. So interesting there for the Browns. It is something to monitor. Obviously, they still have Deshaun Watson in their plans somehow because otherwise they wouldn't have activated his window. They would have just left him out for the year. So either he's coming back and playing at some point this year, or they're activating that window to basically just activate it. But that's the thing is they didn't even have to activate it. They could just leave him on there all year. Nobody has to hear his name, and you're good. But that's not what happened. So I'll be curious to see if it maybe takes like 2 really bad starts from Shador and not wanting to go back to Dylan Gabriel, Deshaun Watson getting activated and be like, all right, we're going to go with Deshaun Watson for the last 3 games, see what happens. And maybe that's what it is. I don't know, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, and I would probably disagree with you on the fact that I think it was a good idea to activate him. Even though they didn't have to. I mean, because if he is going to be one of your options next year, yeah, you want him to get back to practice at least for the last 5 games or the last 5 weeks or so. At least get back to practice. Get thrown with the guys. If you can, it helps shake off some of the rust at the bare minimum. Real quick though, I just got a notification. One of my friends texted me that Giannis tore his Achilles. I just got a sleeper notification that he has gone to the locker room. Um, so obviously that would throw quite the wrench in the trade plans that we just spent some time talking about. Obviously I would have to see a replay before, but I mean, yeah, if this is an Achilles, I cannot imagine this is any good. I mean, would imagine he'd be out. I mean, a full calendar year, and this would be yet another one that we see in the NBA. If this is true.
And I just mentioned, the lingering injuries, and he's a player who wants to go downhill. He's one of the best transition players we've ever seen as well, and he constantly is applying pressure on the defense with his physicality, with those big, just Greek freak like Euro steps that we see in the paint with the ferocious dunks. And well, this injury, bluntly put, really just I don't want to say destroys a lot of that for Giannis, but it makes it much more difficult for him to become the same player that he used to be. Damian Lillard's Achilles injury is different. He's a shooting point guard. He's going to play on the perimeter. He's not going to constantly be taking on a ton of contact or a lot of situations. He's not going to be in a lot of situations where he needs to focus on how he's landing, right? So like layups, dunks, finishing through contact. Dame is very underrated at that. He was a great finisher at the rim in his time in Portland in the first time around, especially with some of the highlight dunks we've seen from him. But he doesn't play like a Kyrie does, where Kyrie is very much a finesse player at the rim. He's going to attack a lot. He relies on the mid range, and he is very quick with his decision making. Dame's a little bit different, and I think Kyrie will see as well with his ACL, like where he's at and how he looks. I don't think it's going to actually impact him as much as people may think, because he's so skillful with the basketball, and he's literally the best ball handler I've ever seen in my life. I'm not going to let anybody tell me otherwise. That's what he is. So for Giannis, well, this changes things because you now have a year less on your contract, potentially a year and a half less, considering the whole rehab and when he gets back into play next year. So if he were to get traded, we'll see. But maybe this is why that report came out that Giannis and the Bucks are going to talk about his future and moving him or something else, because they knew, and maybe he knew already, as well as the Bucks training staff, before the report ever came out officially, that he did in fact tear his Achilles and he was going to be out. And Giannis now has to think about the next steps in his career. And maybe that's why it came out just prematurely. And obviously, they wouldn't have been able to trade him without the physical. Physical would have been failed, and it would have been a Mark Williams situation with the Lakers. So it was going to come out eventually. Maybe that's why we saw that first report first. But man, that changes things. It really just destroys like a whole segment we just talked about. But those teams could still trade for Giannis, probably at a much cheaper price now, and that makes everybody happy except the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah, and I think this would decrease his value a little bit. I would imagine, if you have your trading for him, and you're not going to get him for a significant amount of time. But I did see the video. He was coming back down the floor after a basket, I think, and I mean he fell right to the ground, and I think he knew it right away. And he didn't look like he was in any like serious pain, but I I would question. I'm assuming he came into this game with a calf strain because that's how these sort of injuries happen. Halliburton in the playoffs, he had that calf strain during the series, and you just have to give him credit for playing. I mean, even Giannis. I know this isn't Game 7 of the Finals, but even Giannis, I give him a lot of credit for playing. But if you know that you're having talks about your future, you might potentially get traded some point this season here in the near future. Why are you playing through calf strains? Like especially given the history, the past year or so of all the Achilles injuries in the NBA. Why would you really try and risk that? I think I question. I mean, again, give him a ton of credit for playing, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely a huge risk if he's going and playing, with already pre-strained calves.
And the whole calf strain thing has become an increasing issue in the NBA, especially because it, as time has gone on, has rapidly turned into pretty much a premature Achilles tear. And I say it like that because all these players play on their calf strain and then they blow their Achilles out. Me being a runner, like I've had calf strains, not a full strain, but I've had, calf soreness and things. And even I psychologically think about it because I've seen it happen to a ton of NBA players. The problem is it's a different sport. Running isn't going to have the same impact, and the cuts and the turns and the slides and the dunks and all that stuff that basketball does. So you're always working different muscle types depending on the sport that you're in. And for Giannis, literally the way that he plays is going to warrant some sort of lower leg injury, and he's had those. The Jason Tatum Achilles tear was honestly freak. It just happened. Halliburton's, we all knew the risk prior to him playing in that game, and he did too, and he still chose to play. And when I knew he was playing, I said, there's a probability here that he tears his Achilles, and he did, in fact, tear his Achilles. When Kevin Durant did his, coming back from a calf strain, completely blew his out as well. So we've had a lot of them recently. Even Dame, he was trying to come back injured. Getting out of injured and into hurt, it's two different things. Like you're hurt or you're injured. And in this case, he was injured. He had also missed a lot of that time because of the blood clot situation. So he didn't have basketball reps really and practicing and stuff. He pretty much as soon as he was cleared just came back to help the Bucks in the playoffs, and he got hurt pretty much like 2-3 games in. So I think if your players and training staffs and us as fans, we need to be a little bit more wary and educated on the whole calf strain thing and maybe take those a little bit more serious, like 2 to 3 weeks serious. People like to do that with the hamstring, but they don't like to do that with the calf. And I'm speaking as somebody who has had a ton of riddles with my hamstrings and the various strains that I've had, so I can speak to it to some extent. But we should probably treat the calves and the lower leg, like below the knee and down, with a little bit more caution moving forward. And I know that they're trying to do that, but I think it's time to truly have a conversation about it. So, unless you have anything else, I think that's all for us from episode 15 with the breaking news on Giannis, unfortunately. So, we will now actually be recording episode 16, and we'll transition into that here in one moment. But to close this episode out, thank you to everybody who is watching, listening, doing whatever it is you're doing on the various platform you're doing it from. And speaking of those various platforms, like, subscribe, follow, share, comment, whatever it is you do on the various platform you do it from. We would love the support, and obviously the algorithm has had its moments with us. It's had some good ones, some bad ones, so do everything you can to at least like, subscribe, share, comment. We appreciate all of it, and we hope everybody did, in fact, have a blessed Thanksgiving. We were very busy ourselves. I had not posted our stuff only because it was such a hectic week and all of the different things that were going on that we'll now start to talk about in episode 16 after this. So thank you to everybody who listened to this edition of Beyond the Box Score. Trayvon Hastings, Joey Korzanowski. We'll be back and with you guys in the next one. 54 on the dot, I think.